So now I've kind of already done my main work for today, it feels. Like, I made a few videos that explore the question of information, and it's been pretty interesting for me. And now I just want to walk home and enjoy the ride. But since the camera is here anyway, and since the mouth is moving, I mean, why not make another one? And just see what comes out of it. I've been looking at many different questions of information and its relation to existence in general. And it seems that there's an incredible potential for how we could use it to improve the quality of our life. This is of course set in the context that our life is pretty spectacular the way it is, and that we've only got one. And that the kind of unique state of affairs we have today is something we have never had before and cannot expect to ever have again. Therefore, my wish is that this is being taken care of and being used to its greatest benefit. So all of this relates to physical action in space. What's come to me as a general impression over the years is that everything which happens is really part of the one great happening, and that everything is always happening together, that there is nothing which is outside of this same field where everything happens. Even information and theory and abstraction and thinking and language and symbolism, all of this stuff is also happening. It's also happening in the physical space where we are moving and breathing and seeing and sensing, and where fantasillions of small bits and pieces are moving around in the air, and everything is just dancing around in space with the stars burning and the waters flowing and the trees waving and the wind singing. It's all going on together. And everything that's going on inside of my skin is going on together with it. So it's one big event where everything is dancing together with everything else. Everything is flowing with everything else. Everything is interacting with everything else. So all is one and nothing is separated. We are all in this together. For example, we have various concepts that we sometimes identify with. For example, I can say that I'm a Norwegian. When I say that expression, Norwegian, it brings certain associations to the mind. However, it can also be seen that the word Norway is one kind of abstract interpretation of a certain land area. And the Norwegian is a person who has happened to live in that land area. It would be easy to imagine a completely different interpretation and a completely different name. If we imagine an infinity of other worlds that look exactly the way our world looks, we could also easily imagine an infinity of other nations and of other border lines and names and cultures and traditional ways of doing things. So in that sense, all of the language we use is conditioned by the entire experience that we are already in. While at the same time, we see that this experience is being conditioned by the words we use. So the words condition the experience, which conditions the words, which conditions the experience, which conditions the words. And all of it goes together with us as we are moving forward and existing the way we're existing. So there isn't really any basic separation between the physical and the theoretical. The theoretical is a part of the structure of the physical. So as the physical world, or what we call the physical world, is moving forward and living its life, there are certain structures and patterns and regularities in these processes. And some of these patterns and regularities are being constated by human minds. And when these human minds constate these patterns and regularities, and there arises yet other similar patterns and regularities in the neural structures of the brains of these humans, then we have what we call theoretical activity. But this theoretical activity is in no way divorced from the physical activity. It is a part of the same activity. It is the same activity. It is exactly the same activity. Because all of this activity is happening together. And this is one of the reasons why we have often heard that the dualistic worldview is a kind of fiction, a kind of fantasy, a kind of imagination. I think I'm actually getting lost here, but yeah, well. Yes, I will find my way back somehow. Maybe I have found the path again. It is an incredibly beautiful path and easy to lose it. Maybe there's no path here at all, I don't know. Oh well. I walk onward and the path will be the path I walk. However it may be. I have found the path now, I think. So now continuing on the path of the conversation. You could see here a very typical example of the direct merging between theory and practice. In one sense, everything I'm saying here is theoretical, but at the same time, it is being said as part of a walk through a physical area. And the structure of the physical area directly goes together with the structure of the talk. So it's easy to find examples of this. You can find examples everywhere. There is no fundamental separation between the theoretical and the physical, between fantasy and reality. So this brings up a very interesting question, which is the very common notion of fantasy and reality. Which is related to the relation between the description and the described. Or saying it differently, the description and the larger space of event of which that description is a part, of which the activity of describing participates within. So in one sense, I don't really believe that there is a definite separation between fantasy and reality. The way I see it is that a fantasy is a part of reality, while the reality goes beyond the fantasy. So reality is always infinitely more than any given fantasy, while the fantasy at the same time remains real as what it is, and can in many cases be very influential and have various consequences in real life. Obviously, there wouldn't be a fantasy if there wasn't someone to do the fantasizing. There has to be someone to consider the fantasy if a fantasy is going to have any meaning at all. And once you got someone considering the fantasy, that fantasy is a direct participant in the real world. So a fantasy may not deserve to be dismissed so easily. It has a realness in itself. Maybe this has been underestimated, that the fantasy in itself is a reality. It is a reality that the fantasy is what the fantasy is. Exactly the way it is. And that it is being experienced exactly the way it is, and that it has the kind of influence which it has. And at the same time, it is also clear that every fantasy is always infinitely limited. And that it doesn't actually represent the world beyond it with any degree of completeness. So in that sense, any theory is a fantasy. Even a scientific theory is a fantasy. However, it can be a fantasy which has a similarity to certain structures in the real world. And to the extent that it has a similarity to those structures which are being experienced regularly in the real world, it can be a way of looking at the real world. A theory can be a way of recognizing some of the regularities in the real world, and a way to organize our activities. So a theory never actually represents reality. It never actually describes reality, and to the extent it does, it is always an infinitely incomplete description, where almost everything is missing. And there's no other way. A theory is a way for us to move through reality, a way for us to interpret reality, a way for us to live in reality. And it is something that can give a certain structure to our personal pattern of activities. In this sense, we can well say that the relationship between the human being and the theory, which is expressed through language, is similar to the relationship between the computer and the software. And that the language we use, the theoretical perspectives this language expresses, is a kind of software for the human brain. And that the structure of this software influences the structure of the human brain. And that the structure of the human brain influences the structure of the pattern of activity of the entire human being. And that the pattern of activity of the entire human being influences the entire culture the human being is a part of. And the influence, as mentioned, always also goes the other way. So the form and the meaning of theory emerges out of reality, and it also forms reality. The physical and the abstract is the one and same reality.